General managers and head coaches are at the forefront of building and leading a Super Bowl caliber team, but not everybody is successful at doing so. In the case of Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, the explanation on why they failed is complicated. So today I will answer the question, what went wrong for the Detroit Lions front office? Bob Quinn was the general manager for the Detroit Lions from 2016 to 2020. Quinn was walking into a situation where the team in 2015 just went 7-9 and was looking to make it back into the playoffs. The Lions had a roster with players such as Matthew Stafford, who just passed for over 4,000 yards in 2015, Golden Tate, and Eric Ebron, and that's just on the offensive side of the ball. The Lions also had Calvin Johnson in 2015, but unfortunately he chose to walk away from the game at the age of 30 in 2016 before Quinn had any control over the team. On the defensive side of the ball, the Lions had players such as Stephen Tulich, Glover Quinn, Darius Slay, and Ziggy Ansah. It's safe to say that this was a talented roster that was on the verge of going back to the playoffs with a little help from Quinn. But plenty of mistakes from him derailed this team's hopes of continuously improving and making a deeper and deeper playoff run. So what are those biggest mistakes made by Quinn? Let's start small and work our way up from here. Free agency hasn't been a disaster that the next topics have been for Bob Quinn. Having a mixed bag is the best way to describe it. A handful of big hits and an equal amount of big misses. Starting back in 2016 when Quinn took over, his first mistake was signing Jeremy Curley. Curley, in the previous season with the Jets, only had 16 receptions for 152 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Curley was expected to move into the slot position for the Lions and help a Lions core of wide receivers who were trying to piece together an offense without newly retired All-Pro wide receiver Calvin Johnson. The mistake here isn't the Curley signing itself, but trading him to the 49ers before the season even started. Curley would go on to have a career year with the Niners, catching 64 passes for 667 yards and 3 touchdowns. Next, in 2017, Bob Quinn would have one of his worst signings in right tackle Rick Wagner. Wagner got a 5-year deal worth up to $47.5 million with $29.5 of that guaranteed. He would end up one of Detroit's worst run blockers. PFF had Wagner as the second lowest graded offensive lineman in 2019. He would also have a career low in overall grade and pass blocking in 2019 according to PFF. Not what you would expect or want from the NFL's 6th highest paid right tackle. The next free agent disappointment was the least upsetting out of the bunch. Defensive back Deshaun Sheed had high expectations from the Lions, as high as being the cornerback number 2 on the team. Instead, Sheed turned out a subpar season and arguably the worst coverage player on the team in that year, in 2018. What makes this signing the least disappointing is the fact that Sheed was only paid $790,000 for 1 year. But the biggest waste of a signing came in 2019 with the signing of tight end Jesse James. There are so many things wrong with this signing, but the biggest is the contract. James got signed to a 4-year contract worth up to $22.6 million, which was a top 15 contract for a tight end in the league. Only 1 month later, the Lions and Quinn decided to draft tight end TJ Hockenson with the 8th overall pick in the draft. Hockenson has been one of the few bright spots in the 2020 season for Detroit, but on the other hand, Jesse James has been non-existent. James in 2019 was 3rd out of a possible 4 tight ends in targets in his first year, while only getting 16 catches for 142 yards. In 2020, he hasn't fared much better. He is currently tied with Adrian Peterson for 11th on the team in receptions with 11. He also only has 107 yards in receiving and 1 touchdown. This is possibly Quinn's worst signing. If you only looked at the offensive side of the ball, Quinn has actually been quite successful drafting. Drafting players such as Frank Ragnow, Kenny Galladay, Taylor Decker, and TJ Hockenson would make you think that Quinn has an eye for talent. But if you look at the other side of the ball, he has yet to hit on a defender in the draft that even remotely resembles an impact player. The lack of Quinn's willingness to draft pass rushers and or edge rushers in the first 2 rounds of the draft has affected this team quite significantly. The Lions have been ranked the bottom 10 in the league for pass rush ever since Quinn took over in 2016. The list of pass rushers drafted in the past 5 drafts includes players Anthony Zettel in the 6th, Jeremiah Ledbetter in the 6th, Deshaun Hand in the 4th, Austin Bryant in the 4th, Julian Okwara in the 3rd, Jashawn Cornell in the 7th. The most recent picks, Okwara and Cornell, were both injured when drafted, and Cornell remains injured even now. Hand has missed over half his career due to injury, and Ledbetter has half a sack through 18 games. Quinn's first pass rusher drafted, Zettel, has been his best, having 1 good season in 2017 where he had 6.5 sacks, but ever since he's only played 20 total games for 5 different teams and has 0 sacks. The worst draft Quinn had was back in 2017, where with the top 2 picks in the draft, he took cornerback Tez Tabor and linebacker Gerard Davis. Tabor had one of the worst scouting combine workouts of any cornerback in recent memory. He then went out on the 40-yard dash and ran a 4.63. For reference, the average 40 time for a cornerback in the NFL is 4.48. His measurements for his height, weight, arms, and hands were all subpar, and yet Quinn took him in the second round. Tabor had a mediocre 2017 campaign, having 11 tackles and 0 interceptions, but he also added 2 missed tackles and allowing 10 receptions for 93 yards and a touchdown. PFF gave him a coverage grade of 60. Following that season, Tabor steeply declined, allowing 22 receptions for 371 yards and 4 touchdowns, allowing a reception percentage of 81.5%. PFF gave him a coverage grade of 29.9 that season out of 100. Tabor hasn't played another snap in the NFL since. Now, Gerard Davis was picked in the first round but hasn't lived up to any of the hype set on him in 2017. Davis has been injury riddled and has struggled to play with any type of consistency. He has put together 2 mediocre seasons and 1 terrible one with the Lions. Along the way, he has been a liability on coverage and in run defense. The only consistent thing he has done well is in the pass rush. Being a full-time starter at middle linebacker is not the role fit for Davis, and that has been disappointing for Lions fans. But there has been a light at the end of the tunnel for Davis potentially. Davis has spent his 2020 campaign carving out a part-time backup role as a linebacker on this team, and so far it has treated him well. While he has only played 200 snaps this season, which is less than a third from his previous year, he has had a career year. According to PFF, he is the 4th ranked linebacker with at least 200 snaps and number 1 in linebackers for his coverage, but he is still a liability on his run defense. Take most of these rankings with a grain of salt, because once again he only has 200 snaps, compared to Bobby Wagner's 821 total snaps, who is ranked the number 1 linebacker overall. When we launched the search for our next head coach, I wanted to find a leader that could take us to the next level, and I am confident that we have found that in Matt Patricia. Bob Quinn was quoted right after hiring Matt Patricia as the new head coach of the Detroit Lions. Instead of elevating the team to the next level, these two plunged the Lions further into their despair as a franchise who has not won a playoff game since 1992. Quinn picking Patricia as the new leader for this team was his biggest mistake of all. Instead of going over Matt Patricia's shortcomings as a coach in this section, we will now dive into Bob Quinn's mistake of the initial hiring and then keeping him. Don't worry, we will get to Matt Patricia very soon. No matter what Quinn tells you the reason was for hiring Matt Patricia, whether it was because he's a leader or the correct fit, it's just not the truth. Patricia got hired because Quinn and him were old friends in New England. But Patricia wasn't the only candidate either. Now very successful Titans coach Mike Vrabel was a strong candidate, along with Frank Reich and Matt Nagy, who could help elevate Matthew Stafford's play to MVP caliber level. But Patricia is the one who got the final nod. There was also an issue of keeping blinders up to Patricia and keeping him around longer than he should have. Quinn gave in to Patricia's every desire, including disdain for talented players with personality or running players out of Detroit completely. Quinn turned a blind eye to the locker room divide that was occurring in Detroit and let Patricia seemingly do whatever he wanted. If he had gotten rid of Patricia sooner, then he may still have a job currently in this moment. But enough about Bob Quinn. Let's move into Matt Patricia and the current state of the Detroit Lions. Matt Patricia and the Detroit Lions are in a current state of disarray that was worse than when Patricia took over as head coach back in 2018. In 2018, he was hired to take over after the Jim Caldwell era, where Caldwell ended his tenure with a winning percentage of 54.5%, which was the best among full-time Lions coaches in the expansion era. Patricia ended his time with the Lions with a winning percentage of 31.4%, 4th worst in franchise history. Over these 3 years, Detroit was 28th in wins, 24th in point differential, 26th in yardage differential, and 28th in records when the game was within 1 score. The ultimate downfall for Patricia was trying to replicate a system that has only worked under one man. That system is the Patriots Way. The Patriots Way is a structure defined by physical practices and post-practice conditioning that former Lions and Patriots player Ricky Jean-Francois referred to as gruesome. Head coaches rule more as dictators than democratic leaders, and they have a tendency to call out players in full team settings, putting guys on the spot to quiz or identify unwanted behavior. Players are expected to fall in line, and any resistance or too much self-expression is not tolerated. The Patriots Way has only worked under one man, like I mentioned before, and that man is Bill Belichick, and Matt Patricia is the furthest thing from Bill Belichick. Not everyone can be plug and play in a system. Not everyone can manage a locker room and tone down personalities within a couple of seasons. Not everyone can bring a winning formula to a middle-of-the-pack team and turn them into dynasties. Patricia tried too hard to push the way of the Patriots onto the Lions locker room and organization. Patricia was quoted many times saying, "We have a long way to go." And this was completely false. Detroit was coming off of a 9-7 season and ended up second in a tough NFC North division. Detroit narrowly missed the playoffs that year. Patricia wasn't being brought into a situation where the entire roster needed identity or culture change. Patricia was there to help them win important games against the better teams of the NFL, which Jim Caldwell was failing to do so. Patricia was meant to build upon what he had, not tear the whole thing apart. Another one of Patricia's favorite quotes was, "I am on a crusade to eliminate bad football." He was of course referring to not the players themselves, but penalties, missed assignments, and poor fundamentals. Former Lions safety Glover Quinn and many others did not interpret it that way though. Quote, "It was like everything in Detroit, what we were doing, how things worked, everything was not good, was wrong, was bad. We felt like we had started changing the culture and changing the way Detroit was viewed. And then for you to come in and just be like, I am going to tear everything down. I don't know if we needed it all to be torn down. We just need you to help us get over the hump." In the locker room, he alienated some of his best players when he arrived and traded away key players and popular figures in Darius Slay, Quandre Diggs, and receiver Golden Tate. During training camp in 2018, he called out Slay in a full team meeting for posting a picture of himself lined up against an opposing receiver, telling him to stop sucking the receiver's you-know-what. The exact quote is actually more graphic than YouTube will allow. And this is completely unacceptable and began driving a further and further divide between the players and Patricia. Patricia would continue to make his mark in the locker room by bringing in former Patriots players Trey Flowers, Danny Amendola, Deron Harmon, and Jimmy Collins. These players knew him and understood his style of coaching. These players have indeed worked out well in Detroit and have done well in this system. But the issue is, the other players on the team have not been nearly as successful in the system, but you can't just bring in a whole slew of former Patriots players. Once again, you have to build upon what you have, not tear the whole thing down. And when it comes to coaching, Patricia was hired for his defensive prowess, and the Lions never saw their problems fixed in this time. Detroit couldn't stop the run in his last 2 seasons, and Patricia's insistence on playing man-heavy schemes with the little ability to create consistent defensive pressure left corners and safeties in poor situations all season. Here in the 2020 season, the Lions are currently ranked as the worst coverage team in the NFL with a grade of 34 according to PFF. 2 of their corners, starter Desmond Trufant and first-round draft pick Jeff Okudah, have grades of below 40. These 2 combined have given up 58 receptions for 837 yards, 3 touchdowns, and have a reception percentage of 72.5 when targeted. Lions are also ranked 10th worst in pass rush, 3rd worst in tackling, and 10th worst in run defense, which overall makes them the 2nd worst defense in the league, only behind the Las Vegas Raiders. The Lions have 11 players with at least 300 snaps played this season with a defensive grade of below 60. Only 1 defensive back player, Deron Harmon, has a coverage grade of above 60. Only 1 interior defensive lineman, Danny Shelton, has a pass rush grade of above 60, and only 2 edge rushers, Trey Flowers and Romeo Okwara, have a pass rush grade of above 60, and the list goes on and on about how thin this Lions team is in almost every category on defense. On the offensive side of the ball, the story doesn't get much better. Patricia came in preaching that this team could run the ball. Since then, the Lions have ranked 20th or worst every season in rushing offense. This season is the worst, where the Lions are ranked the 2nd worst rushing team in the NFL. This year especially is very head-scratching. The Lions picked DeAndre Swift in the 2nd round of this year's past NFL draft and was expecting to be in a committee role with fellow running backs Adrian Peterson and Kerryon Johnson. Swift, Peterson, and Johnson have almost the same amount of snaps on offense, but if you break those snaps down into carries for each running back, the total is lopsided in favor of Peterson. Adrian Peterson, 35 years old, one of the greatest running backs of this generation, and is leading the team in carries. It's a great story, and I love Adrian Peterson, but good stories don't turn into production for the team. Peterson is currently ranked the 62nd running back out of 65 that PFF grades at the time of this recording. He has 119 carries for 444 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3.7 yards per carry. DeAndre Swift has 70 carries for 331 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 4.7 yards per carry, and also is ranked the 27th best running back in the league. Swift is obviously the more efficient back, so tell me why Patricia is so hell-bent on keeping this backfield a committee. I can tell you why. The Patriots Way. Named the last running back for New England that has actually been the de facto number one and the workhorse for the team. Patricia is so stuck in his ways that he can't see the production and genuine help that Swift could bring to this offense. And, not to mention, Matthew Stafford. He really doesn't see anyone else in the offense as important like he does Matthew Stafford. And usually that's fine because the quarterback, obviously, is the most important guy on the field. But in the case for this team, Patricia treats Matthew as the entire franchise and the entire offense. Because of the little help from a questionable backfield and a receiving core outside of Kenny Golladay that is pretty sad, Matthew Stafford continues to struggle this season. The Lions are ranked as the 12th worst passing team in the NFL. The list of teams who are worse consists of the Broncos, who have had 4 different starting quarterbacks this year, including a practice squad wide receiver turned quarterback for one game, the 49ers, Jaguars, the Washington football team, and the Cowboys, all with 3 different starters. The Bears, Dolphins, Jets, Panthers, and the Ravens have all had 2 different starters. The Eagles are the only ones worse than them that haven't had a different starter have to come in. But we all know how Carson Wentz have been playing this year. And still, for whatever reason, if you think that Matthew Stafford can do it all, he is ranked as the 23rd quarterback in the league, which is by far his worst ranking since his rookie season in 2009. I still think Matthew Stafford can get it done in Detroit, but he needs more help around him to get him back to those days of being ranked as a top 15 quarterback in the league. Patricia continuously talked about needing to make improvements over his tenure in Detroit, but those improvements never came. It was more of the same each week. Disappointment. And at the end of his and Bob Quinn's departure, that's all the Detroit Lions are left with. Now, in the next video, I will be going over where I think the Detroit Lions should go from here, and that includes the coaching candidates, the GM candidates, who they should re-sign, who they should pick up in free agency, and who they should draft in 2021. Stick around for that in the next video. I want to go ahead and thank everybody who is still here at the end of the video. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you want to see future content like this, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you want to see the next video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Press the bell icon. You will be notified when I do post next. And if you do have any video recommendations, go ahead and put them in the comment section below. I will be responding to all video recommendations. I really do appreciate it, you guys. This has been NFL Empire. Peace.